I am Jo, and thank you so much for joining us today. If you're like my wonderful mother who's here with me today, you might be wondering how we're going to talk about recycling for an hour and a half of any interest. So don't worry, you're not alone, and we will make it interesting. We are talking about something that is pretty low order of importance for most of us, something we do every day with very little thought, and something we actually don't get much feedback on either. It's quite an invisible process, the old recycling. We put it in the bin, we put it on the curb, or we take it to the tip and we are done. So today we're going to unpack whether we're actually doing as good a job as we think and what we can do better for you at home. This is all about homes, and some of it may apply to businesses, but we really are talking about our place of residence at the moment. So as Karen mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Good for the Hood. We started about 4 years ago, and we do this all the time. I've got a team of 2 others, and we travel around educating people about those low order things which really make a difference to our communities. So things like recycling, things like reducing electricity use, things like being a good neighbour, things that make a difference to being in our communities and the impact we also have on our environment. And we believe that both go hand in hand, that you can't be a good citizen without looking after the place we live, our country, and you can't look after a country without caring for each other as well. So hopefully recycling is just a small part of that, and that you walk away today feeling validated that you've been doing it all right, maybe reconsidering a couple of things that you've been doing, or thinking, wow, we have a lot to fix up at home. And wherever you are, there's no shame. We all have to start somewhere. I am interested to know how many of you feel you're a pretty good recycler though. Hands up. We can all go home then. That's me there, and there's a couple of photos of my wonderful kids trying to learn to be recyclers. And you'll see that we have a very young attendee here today. It's great, start early, recycle often. That's my strategy. I'm going to try and juggle my handouts at the same time. So today we are talking about a couple of things. We're not going to be too boring about it, I promise. I'm going to try and make this the most exciting recycling workshop you've ever been to. Maybe it's the only one, and that's also fine. So this has come off the back of a lot of work that the Northern Inland Regional Waste team have been doing. They've done a fair amount of, I guess, undercover recycling work, which, you know, is like the most boring spy work you can do, but it happens. So they do things like, were you recording things, Karen, was that right? Was there a process that went looking at contaminants that were coming out?
There was just one behaviour change program that they did.
Excellent. Yeah, so they've had a little bit of a look at what's going on. So you'll see it happen a bit. Sometimes you might be notified that you've had a bit of a bin audit, which means someone has literally rifled through rubbish to see if you've done it right. You might be given a green tick or a little note to say you've done well. So there are ways that we can verify that. But one of the ways we know that we're not doing it very well is what's ending up at our processing facilities. And the bad news, unfortunately, for Australians is that we're actually overconfident and not very competent with recycling. With other things, we're probably fine with recycling. So it's important to understand when we're talking about recycling that it is not the silver bullet solution to all environmental issues. I'm sure you're here not thinking that it is, but a lot of people in Australia believe that it is fundamentally the most important environmental behaviour that they can participate in, which is great, because we've obviously done a very good job of promoting it as an important part of our community, but there are lots of other things that you can do which are really beneficial for the planet. Recycling is just one part, and in fact, if you only do recycling and nothing else, I would encourage you to look at other things that you can do, because there are certainly a lot of more important things that we can do. But getting our recycling right is really critical, because when we do it wrong, we create literally a truckload of issues. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk about waste, obviously, is a hierarchy. We really want you to walk away today thinking about the fact that if recycling is not the solution for all your waste, then should you have that waste in the first place? That is one of the fundamental issues we have We consume things which we actually have no end-of-life plan for. We have a waste hierarchy which says we need to avoid having this waste in the first place, if at all possible, even if it can be recycled, because something that's been created which could be avoided is embodying a lot of additional carbon, a lot of additional problems. So if we can avoid it, great. That should always be our first port of call. If you can reduce it or repair it or reuse it, fantastic. But if it does need to be recycled, then that's obviously an important step as well. And also, one of the fundamental things we often don't talk about is that it's great to recycle, it's really important, but what's more important is actually to buy recycled. And you'll start to see in a lot of the products on our shelves, 100% post-consumer content, rPET, recycled PET plastic. It's more important that it is used at the other end and that we buy it, because that creates the market for the products that we're so good at creating and putting in our yellow bins. So if you want to help the planet, buy recycled content, buy recycled paper, buy products that have that promote that post-consumer content. Same as fabrics, textiles, because that's creating that end market. And I think we had a little chat before about the circular economy, and that's exactly what it is. It's not circular unless it's going back into the market. So we all thought we were pretty good recyclers. Does anyone know how many Australians believe that they are also good recyclers? Percentage-wise?
70%.
Yeah, about 74% of Australians say, I'm really good at recycling. Does anyone want to have a guess at how many are actually good at recycling? It's lower than 30%, 25%. So 3/4 of us think we're great, only 1/4 of us are actually great. So, and that's okay. We've all done things, myself included, over the years that we think once we've learnt a bit better, we don't have to do it anymore. So I'm sure Karen herself would attest that there are things that you think should be going in there and then you learn actually not the right way. So we're going to hopefully dispel some of those myths. Most people in Australia, about 90%, believe recycling is incredibly important. So we don't have to sell it too hard, but we do have to get better at doing it. Okay, so what is recycling? Who thinks they know what recycling is? It's a process of recovering a commodity. That is entirely what recycling is for us. It is putting something into a supply or a system which can be recovered and reused. For us, it means we put something in the bin and we actually probably never see the rest of that system ever again. But if you ever get a chance to go to a waste transfer station, a landfill, a materials recovery facility, or any kind of recycling facility, I would urge you to do that, because it will blow your mind. Firstly, the scale of waste in Australia. We're some of the most wasteful people in the world per capita. We're very, very good at using and disposing of things. We have great waste management systems, which is awesome, because if we didn't, we'd look like a country that didn't have a good waste system. But we have to be, I guess, just like the places we're going to send our waste, we at home have to be our own little micro sorters at home before it gets there. It's not good enough to assume they'll sort it out at the other end, because that's where Australia is getting into trouble. So our job at home is to use a product, make sure that we process it or clean it or separate it in the appropriate way, that we then put it into the appropriate places at home that we have designated for that item, that we put it in the bin if it's appropriate to go in the bin, and then it's then collected and then processed and sorted. The problem is in Australia, does anyone else find it a little bit complex? Some of the items that come through our homes, and you stand there over the bin with that process of like, not sure, it's a bit this, it feels like it could be half plastic, bit papery. That's the problem in Australia, that we also had an incredible complexity with the packaging that we get items in. We've got really beautiful packaging, incredibly wasteful packaging, and a lot of composite materials. So our commodities are sorted, and I'll show you in a sec, in a very specific way, which is about trying to separate it. So if we don't separate it well enough, that's where we start to get this thing called contamination. And one of the reasons that the EPA, who funds this program, is doing this training and trying to get people to talk about recycling better is that it's causing immense issues, not just for the waste industry, which it is and has, but also for people who work in that industry and also for us as residents and ratepayers. We spend a lot of money on our rates. I don't think it's huge, but we spend money on our rates, and it pays for a service of which waste is one of them. And that has to go a long way to cover the sort of processes that they need to have. So when you start to see the sorts of coverage that we see in the media about the waste industry, you start to understand why we have a problem. First and foremost, there's been a lot of press a few years ago about China refusing to take some of our waste, and we would have heard the phrase the China sword policy, and that there was a pushback, and there was a lot of Four Corners shows, a lot of coverage of this sort of issue, that Australia has an issue with where our recyclables go. Whilst that was obviously concerning and got a lot of traction for residents and community members, what the waste industry was saying is that this is exactly the problem. We have a lot of commodities that are not very clean. We've got contamination because we don't have the best ways of getting these items through clean, and we can't send them anywhere because we don't have a lot of the ways to process them in our markets for them. So it actually just highlighted an issue that they were already feeling, and some steps have been taken to address that. But it came down to the price of commodities and the fact that we were sending things overseas that were not good enough quality for them to have a reasonable price for use in their future markets. Because it had bits of food stuck in it, or because it had paper stuck in with the glass, or because a bit of plastic had made its way into the aluminium. Now there's always going to be a little bit of contamination when you go through the process we look at, but that was one of the reasons why they were saying is that your contamination rate in Australia is way too high for us to accept your waste anymore. The other issue we have when we don't recycle right is we have a lot of fires, and not many people know that. Does anyone know what causes fires in recycling trucks or on landfills or in recycling facilities? Batteries. Mobile phones, yeah. So look, there's a lot. You think about what we put in the bin. There's some pretty flammable items. Yeah. Sorry, what did you say?
Fermentation.
Fermentation. Yeah. So if we put certain things in the bin, you've potentially got accelerants in there. There's a hairspray can in there. So if we put the wrong thing in the bins, batteries are a very big issue. Apart from the fact that they leach and cause other issues, they start fires. And when they start, what have you got? Beautiful fuel, a lot of interesting gases, a bit of heat, and a truck, and they burn for a long time. So I know you guys don't need many reasons to think about not moving to Sydney, but at least every few weeks there is a bin truck fire in Sydney somewhere, and they literally have to dump their rubbish on the street and hose it out, just like that image. So that's an example of poor recycling and what it causes for us. That's I actually don't think that's a recycling truck, but it happens in recycling trucks as much as it does in the other. You also see that we have fires in facilities, and we also have, as an ex-health and safety person, an awful lot of injuries. So if you know someone who works in a facility that's processing this stuff, the stuff they have to pull off the line that shouldn't be in those bins is foul. So we have, and my favourite question is always to ask people when I go to these facilities, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? And it blows your mind. Half a marlin, a boa constrictor, 12 packs of used nappies. You know, like it's just a half a shopping trolley that someone's managed to fit in their yellow bin. So beyond just what we would consider being a weird contaminant, the things that end up going in our yellow bins is sometimes actually highly dangerous. Not to mention sharps, chemicals, accelerants, other things that can cause injury. So we have enough reason to get it right, and if nothing else, do it because it potentially might stop you having to pay more for your rates. Because at the end of the day, if we do it right, then the council doesn't get charged more by the contractor. So in Australia, we have a few ways that we process our waste. Now, in your region, you may or may not. Who's from Tamworth here? Everyone? Anyone? No. Do we have anyone from Gunnedah? Yes. Anyone from the Liverpool Plains Shire? No. Armidale? You're going to help me. Manila, excellent. Oh, thank you, and welcome. And we've got someone from Tenterfield here. So we've covered a few bases. So your waste will all go potentially to different places for processing, or in some cases they might go to the same place. And if you live in Sydney, like me, everyone's waste pretty much ends up in the same place no matter where you live. And so depending on where your waste is going, and depending on the, I guess, complexity of the materials recovery facility, or the MRF, the MRF, your waste will be processed in one way or another. It will be a combination of people touching items and pulling them off a conveyor belt, machines processing and pulling off items on a production line, and some kind of packaging up of that waste and removal to another processing facility. It is like one big, massive supermarket checkout, and they are sorting those items out into the appropriate ways. It's much messier and smellier and dirtier and louder than that, but it is one way of just literally getting all those items into the right spot.